part of that training camp is just around the corner is revisiting the Marner situation, and there's people there that will talk about it. Nylander's line was Marner wasn't thinking about leaving the Maple Leafs, and there's all this sort of retrospective analysis on how that could have been avoided. But the fact is he's gone, and we're going to talk about it a bit, but at some point we all move on.
Well, look, this whole thing about, Marner having sort of a preconceived notion he was leaving, which seems to be a narrative that's emerged through a collection of anecdotes, right? You've heard him talking about how he spoke at the Four Nations Cup to guys that play on the Golden Knights about living in Vegas. And, Ryan Reeves, elaborated on the fact that Marner had been asking him about what was Vegas like. And because Reeves had played there and Max Pacioretty the same. And I totally understand why people assume that. But I'm sort of with William Nylander on this. Like, the idea that there couldn't have been a choose-your-own-adventure alternate ending to the Mitch Marner saga, of course there could have been, if the Leafs would have done what a lot of people expected them to do eventually, which was win some playoff games they were supposed to win and get deep into a playoff run. And if they would have done that, I can't be convinced that he was a preordained, signed, sealed, delivered Vegas Golden Knight. Like, if these guys beat Florida, they don't blow that Game 3, they show up in Game 5 and Game 7. I just can't believe that, it couldn't have ended differently from Marner. So for Nylander to say he didn't think he was, had one foot at the door, I see some semblance of truth to that.
Yeah, listen, I wasn't there for those conversations that Reeves or Patre may not have with Marner, but I can tell you, you're always kind of trying to gather an intel on what other teams are like. Always. You just acquire a new player, so whoever it is, you're like, hey, man, what was the coach like? What's like living in that city? What is this guy like? You're always kind of, and you're trying to get to know the guy as well, but you're always interested on what the organizations are like, and just to kind of compare to what you have. And not that you think I'm going to leave this organization, but, what's the standard they have in Anaheim compared to what they have in Phoenix or whatever, Utah, I guess now. So I think that some of those conversations are going to happen no matter what, because you're genuinely interested. What's it like other places?
Who wouldn't do that? I mean, that's just normal behavior.
Sure. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, the other thing Nylander said was, same thing Matthews said was, hey, it's just part of the business. This is all about business, which to me sort of implies about money, which to me is part of the problem here. Like the idea that, whatever they're saying publicly, let's hope they privately recognize, Struddy, that this had nothing to do with money. This had everything to do with the business of winning hockey games, and in the Leafs case, the business of losing too many important ones in big situations in the playoffs. I mean, that's simply what this is, and what happens in a city over time to the main players when they lose again and again and disappoint their fan base. And I think you would hope they know that privately. They're not going to maybe say it publicly. This idea that this is just about, the cruel business of hockey, that's not what this is about at all, Struddy, and I don't know how you see it.
Yeah, when I hear the word business, I think it's more than just the money. I think it's everything, right? I think part of the business, quotations would be losing friends. Like they're friends. They're all friends. So the business would incorporate friends or guys you like, even really good friends. They leave. They go somewhere else. So I think that's kind of a broader way of looking at business. But I think that they do, because these guys want to win as well. You win a Stanley Cup in Toronto, your name is whispered on the wind for eternity. Right, and that's and even look at some of the great players, the way they're still revered there. Wendell Clark, one of my favorite players growing up, didn't win a Stanley Cup, but my God, that guy is revered there, and by all Leafs fans, and well, he should be. So I think that these guys want to win, and they see other teams that are winning and how much fun it is. So I'm sure they know that as smart hockey people, things have to change, and you have to continue to evolve to find the right recipe. And unfortunately, sometimes that's tough decisions, like Marner and the Leafs kind of did.
Well, Wendell, Doug Gilmour, Sittler for sure, Cujo, when they do that salute to the troops and they bring out the jersey to the Armed Forces member, and any of those guys are announced, the place lights up. So, yeah. Yeah,
but I mean, for sure. And I think that's partly because those guys got a little deeper into the playoffs, and those guys, there was never any question about their competitive spirit and their ability to compete, right? And I think that's, and maybe look, I mean, it's all going to be in the eye of the beholder. I mean, there was a time when Vince Carter was a hated figure in Toronto and got booed every time he came to town, and now that time has passed and he gets cheered and gets his number retired, right? So like things can change about the way you see a player. But in the moment, I think there's a lot of bitterness about the way this team has performed, and there's certainly a lot of bitterness toward Marner, and it'll be interesting to see how he's received when he comes back. I think it'll be a mixed reaction in the Toronto crowd when he gets back here with the Golden Knights. But you're right, Struddy. Like they want to win. They see what it would be like. They can kind of sense what it would be like because they've seen even a modest amount of success winning 2 playoff series gets this town into an absolute tizzy and gets everybody, on an absolute bandwagon that is unstoppable. But wanting to do it and doing it are two different things. And these guys just haven't shown the ability to figure out the difference.
Well, and unfortunately, that's, there's 31 teams that are thinking that every year. What are we missing? You look at teams have gotten really close. I think back to Joe Thornton's San Jose Sharks, really good team. Really, really good team, but never got it done. So far the Oilers are another team that haven't got it done. But then you see guys like the Kings or the Hawks. I know recently the teams down in Florida, they figured out a way to get over the top. And, all the teams that win seem to have more than enough talent to get it done. There's never a doubt about, a player here, a player. Everyone seems to be slotted in the right place at times. You think back to that, I think it was the first Tampa Bay team that won. That third line was a second line. Even in Florida last year, like their third line, I mean, is that a second line anywhere else in the NHL? I bet you it is, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And so when I look at the Leafs, if we go through their lineup, and this, I'm not here to beat up on the Leafs, but if you go through it, how many players are you sitting, and wherever you slot them today, are any of them ever saying, oh man, that fourth liner, he should be a second liner, or that third line should be a second line? Like, I don't think that they're there right now, and I don't want to put a damper on their season before it's even started, but that's kind of how those teams win it. And I think that's the job of Trey Levin and company, and the players to get that point where you're like, man, that guy is slotted too far down the lineup, but he's blocked by these 2 studs above him.
Well, look, when 100 points walks out the door, you better be saying that about your third line. It should be your second line. If you're not saying that, you got a big problem.
Well, look, it's like you said yesterday, Tat, man. Like something's got to change. Like they have to play differently. Right. So far in the history of this team in the Matthews era, the sum hasn't added up to more than the parts. Right. Like all these great parts have not added up to something transcendent that's kind of gone on one of these magical runs. They're going to have to, it's Craig Berube's job. It's Brad Treliving's job. It's Austin Matthews' job as the captain. It's John Tavares' job as an assistant captain. It's the job of the core guys to find a way to make this team become more than it's been. And, whether the education of all these losses, all these scars, as Mike Babcock used to call them, add up to experience that helps them, or whether those scars kind of weigh them down to the point where they never succeed. I mean, that's going to be the interesting thing to figure out.